Life story of Emily, who worked as an ordinary nurse in a city hospital. But because she sincerely strived to help each patient, sometimes she was as helpful as, and sometimes a little more than, the leading certified specialists of the medical institution. Once in their department came an elderly woman with a small grandson, and Emily did not even suspect how this meeting would end for her care. A sanitary worker on shift furtively helped a beggar with a sick baby in her arms, and when she, at the behest of the head of the department, dismissed for theft, "Welcome back to Tales Track. I am excited to share a new story with you. Let's get started." Emily was always known for her great diligence and renowned for her enormous kind heart. A middle-aged woman, she worked as an ordinary orderly in a city hospital. However, her genuine desire to help every patient sometimes made her contributions as significant, if not more so, than those of the leading certified specialists at the medical institution. Initially, Emily tried her hand in the adult ward, but after covering for a colleague in the children's hospital a couple of times, she realized that her true calling was to help sick children recover from their troubles. She valued children for their sincerity, which quickly led her to transfer internally to her new work. In her white coat, she was quite striking. A youthful, smiling woman with medium-length light brown hair and green eyes. She was slender and pretty. Her appearance invariably attracted the attention of men. However, her demanding job consumed an enormous amount of time, so her romantic relationships didn't flourish. The men she managed to establish closer contacts with turned out to be either philanderers, hedonists, or simple alcoholics who quickly entered and exited her life. Thus, at the time of the described events, she was proudly alone, having let her personal life drift. Maybe it will all work out somehow, she used to think. But eventually, solitude became a habit. Gradually, she adopted a different stance. In principle, old age with 40 cats isn't such a bad option, since men only bring trouble. From early childhood, despite both her parents' fondness for drinking, Emily grew up as a bright, intelligent, and insightful child, always liked by her teachers, who gave her good grades. Mathematics and algebra came easily to her. She believed that knowing a basic set of rules and formulas could solve any complex problem. But her favourite subjects were biology and later anatomy. Therefore, from a young age, she decided on her future profession, saving people's lives. Of course, Emily wanted to become a doctor, and more specifically, a certified surgeon who could bring people back from the brink of death. However, since both her parents earned mere pennies, most of which they spent on their endless partying, she had to drop out of school after only 9 years. She then enrolled in a medical college where she studied with great enthusiasm. Unfortunately, she didn't finish her studies as her mother fell seriously ill, the years of heavy drinking taking their toll. Fate tightened its grip even more. During her first year of college, her father passed away, forcing her to not only study but also work at the market to pay for her education. Consequently, she couldn't continue her studies because she had to earn her. Fortunately, Emily had enough sense to avoid getting involved with bad company, even though she grew up in a disadvantaged neighborhood full of temptations. Most of her childhood friends ended up badly. Some wound up in prison, others fell into alcoholism or drug addiction, and some even took their own lives due to a lack of prospects. But Emily, as they say, was spared by God. The bad friends gradually fell away, and she was left alone, striving to arrange her life in a way that allowed her to handle minimal housework, work at the market, and study for her exams. It was as if a guardian angel protected her from most pitfalls, giving her the strength to endure this challenging period. After her parents' deaths, Emily was completely alone in the world. Honestly, she even felt a sense of relief. In recent years, her mother's constant drinking had caused numerous problems. Emily, as they say, carried her cross to the very end. But once the cross was lifted, she felt an involuntary sense of freedom. Still, she couldn't achieve her dream of becoming a doctor because she had to pay off utility debts and simply survive. Most of her medical colleagues were very fond of their responsible co-worker. However, she had her detractors, particularly the hospital head, Ekaterina, who seemed determined to lower the performance of the diligent orderly. But there was little to criticize, and Ekaterina was notorious for hating everyone, colleagues, patients, and random people alike. Therefore, Emily tried to ignore her malicious boss, letting her caustic comments pass by. She understood why Karpluk was so bitter. The head doctor was also a lonely woman. Unlike Emily, however, she hadn't accepted her situation and didn't take care of herself, becoming overweight, hunched, and unattractive. Further, men avoided Ekaterina, which greatly embittered her towards the world. No one in the staff sympathized with this woman, who was mired in a common life drama. One day, after enjoying a strong cup of tea in the utility room, Emily relieved her exhausted colleague and made her rounds, keenly noting any disorder and asking patients if they needed assistance. The shift promised no extraordinary events. A bright June evening, the hum of a warm breeze, the rustle of leaves outside the open window, and the incomparable chirping of crickets blending with the noise of traffic on the highway beyond the hospital and the occasional song of birds. It seemed the shift would pass in a calm, slightly melancholic mood, a much-needed respite after a scorching summer day. But these hopes were not to be realized. Like a bolt from the blue, an old grandmother appeared at the door of the children's ward. She looked like a sweet, frail old woman, but clearly had significant life problems, as evidenced by her shabby, impoverished appearance. With her was a boy, barely standing, in a clean white tank top and shorts, his eyes red from high fever. Accompanying them was a tall, very sleepy orderly who helped them to the second floor, and a paediatrician from the reception area, who resembled Abelette from the famous cartoon. "Oh, thank God you're on duty today, Emily," started the paediatrician Pavel as he walked in. "We need to carefully monitor this woman and her wonderful grandson, Noah, until morning. I fear we might be dealing with something more severe than a typical cold. The child's fever is extremely high. Although I've administered the necessary medications and the fever should start to subside soon, it would be best if you, my dear, took several control measurements and reported to the on-duty doctor if needed," Pavel said. Of course, Pavel, Emily, who was sitting by the window, immediately perked up and began her usual tasks. "I'll place them in the second ward. It's completely free." "That's perfect," nodded the doctor. "I'll take my leave then. I have a run in the morning." In a hospital, people typically become friends very quickly. The confined space, shared troubles, and lack of entertainment foster a sense of camaraderie among individuals from various professions and social backgrounds. Anna, the elderly woman, turned out to be a wonderful person who had stayed at the hospital longer than expected. Pavel was right. Noah, the blue-eyed, fair-haired boy, had somehow contracted pneumonia despite it being summer. Over the next couple of weeks, Emily worked her shifts and went home, while the grandmother and grandson awaited his full recovery. By the end of the second week, Noah was significantly better, and Emily couldn't help but notice how exhausted and worn out Anna was. Despite this, Anna, a hardened Soviet worker, tried to maintain a brave face and pretended everything was fine. One evening, Emily decided to have a frank conversation to clear things up. "Anna, forgive my bluntness, but I need to ask," she began uncomfortably. "I'm listening, my dear." "It's been almost 3 weeks since you arrived at the hospital, and no one has come to visit you. Moreover, I can see you're running out of strength, so please tell me honestly. Are you raising Noah alone?" The elderly woman sighed heavily. "It's a complicated situation, dear. I'm afraid you'll grow tired of listening. I'm not in a hurry." As it turned out during their late-night confessions, the boy's parents had died when Noah was just 3 years old. As is often the case, the guardianship authorities didn't thoroughly investigate Anna's situation and quickly placed the child in an orphanage, out of sight, out of mind, as they say. For a long time, the grandmother knocked on the doors of dozens of officials and visited the orphanage on the outskirts of the city almost every evening, trying to convince the competent authority that she could still provide the child with the necessary love and care. However, her small pension and the lack of another breadwinner led to a compromise. The boy spent most of his time at the orphanage, but could stay with his grandmother in her one-room apartment a few days a week. It was a miracle that when Noah fell ill, Anna managed to persuade the orphanage administration to allow her to take him to the city hospital for proper treatment. Who knows what could have happened with all this bureaucratic red tape? The elderly woman concluded her story sadly. How unfortunate. Emily could only respond sadly. "I told you my story might tire you," Anna smiled weakly. "No, not at all. It's just that everything seems so unfair in this world." "Would you like to hear another personal story about injustice?" asked Anna, taking advantage of the fact that Noah was sound asleep, having tired himself out running in the corridor for the first time in a long while. "Yes, please," the intrigued orderly agreed eagerly. "Just promise you won't think I'm crazy and that you'll believe at least most of what I say. Is it really that unusual? That's for you to decide." Anna met the 1990s like many residents of the once vast country. She lost her job at a factory that was downsizing in a desperate attempt to survive the sudden and unexpected market economy. However, instead of falling into despair, the woman who had spent her life making industrial parts managed to start her own small cooperative, acquiring several machines from the rapidly dying enterprise. Moreover, a few former colleagues supported the idea and became the first team of the mini-factory. At first, the business struggled, but gradually things settled down, and within 5 years, Anna's enterprise had a decent cash flow. As a versatile person, the enterprising woman decided to enter the restaurant business and was on the verge of opening her own restaurant, having purchased all the necessary equipment. Her son-in-law, who worked as a chef, greatly assisted her, preventing any major mistakes. The business owner was already planning for the future, envisioning her daughter and son-in-law continuing the family business. But then, a series of crises hit, and the main enterprise quickly collapsed, leaving her with enormous debts. In the end, she was left with just a one-bedroom apartment, albeit in the city centre, a closed restaurant that escaped the attention of collectors, a small pension, and bills constantly monitored by bailiffs. That's why I've declined in recent years. There's not enough money for treatment, let alone new clothes. And when my daughter and son-in-law died in a car accident, my life turned into a nightmare as I couldn't think of anything but bringing Noah home. Even now, my small savings are being spent on expensive medicines for my grandson, but at least I can help. What if I couldn't? What did they do in that state institution to let my grandson get pneumonia in the middle of summer? How could they help? Drafts can be treacherous, Emily replied vaguely, as the conversation put her in a somber mood. "I must have tired you, my dear." No, Anna, you've just triggered a cascade of thoughts." The period of intensive treatment passed, and a week after their conversation, the elderly woman and her grandson were discharged. Emily found herself unable to think of anything else but the fate of the extraordinary patient and her wonderful Her mood, as they say, was in the dumps. To make matters worse, another annoying suitor, Oliver, started clinging to the orderly at this very time. Oliver had recently transferred to the city hospital and was immediately disliked by many women in the He was supposedly a practicing dentist, a seemingly serious and qualified specialist, but he was such a troublemaker that it was a nightmare to encounter him alone in a corridor. He would immediately try to corner someone just for fun. He wasn't even attractive. Short, with a large belly, extremely hairy arms, a prominent bald spot, and very small, shifty eyes that barely resembled those of a human. Moreover, Oliver was ready to stoop to any meanness to survive in this harsh world. Survival was a frequent necessity. Angry husbands often intended to give a thrashing and vigilante justice to the overly eager lover hero. In fact, It was precisely the pursuit by husbands that forced Komarov to transfer to a new hospital on the other side of the city. Ekaterina gladly accepted the new specialist, sensing a kindred spirit filled with malevolence and contradictions. Oliver's unpleasant jokes multiplied, and soon all the women in the hospital, including the patients, began to avoid Vitaly. As fate would have it, Emily, seeking treatment for a small tooth stain, immediately caught the eye of the seasoned philanderer more than the others. It culminated one evening when Emily slapped the dentist loudly on the staircase of the pediatric department, suspecting his frequent late hours coincided with her night shift. Well, Oliver said angrily, rubbing his stinging cheek, "You'll crawl to me on your knees begging for forgiveness." "Be careful someone doesn't put you on your knees again." Emily laughed back and forgot about the incident. She shouldn't have. Within a week, the entire hospital was in an uproar as Vitaly's wallet, containing his substantial recent paycheck, went. The dentist accused none other than Emily of stealing the money while treating her tooth, which elicited laughter from the staff, as no one took the accusation seriously. However, Ekaterina, who had long sought a reason to dismiss the overly popular orderly, seized the opportunity. She launched an internal investigation, ensuring all leads pointed to Emily. Ultimately, the head nurse summoned her subordinate for an unpleasant conversation. "Either resign voluntarily, or I involve the police," the head nurse said with a predatory smile. Even the Pope himself, Emily retorted boldly, having nothing to lose. "Give me the resignation form." "You can leave without any notice period?" "How kind of you," Emily replied sarcastically. The pressure from the head nurse and Oliver's harassment had indeed pushed the orderly to her breaking point. Fortunately, there was another hospital nearby where she could easily find work due to her excellent reputation. Thus, Emily saw this entire situation as a sign from above and a long-awaited reason to change jobs. For now, she could finally take a break. By the time she resigned, Emily had worked for several years without a vacation, haunted by lingering guilt over Anna and her grandson. Emily, on her last shift, discreetly obtained the address of the orphanage where Noah now lived through medical registration records. Taking a break from her accumulated household chores, she set aside a day, bought toys and sweets, and went to visit the practically unfamiliar boy. Therefore, Emily felt awkward and even ashamed when she encountered the same grandmother in the belongings inspection room at the orphanage. "Oh, you're here too," the elderly woman exclaimed in surprise. "To be honest, your story moved me so much that I decided to visit Noah at the orphanage," Emily admitted. "Is that so?" Anna responded with a mysterious smile. "Then come with me. Noah remembered you too. He says you're very kind and caring. The boy has fallen for you, no doubt about it." The entire evening, the grandmother, her grandson, and the former orderly spent time together like a real family on the orphanage grounds. Throughout this time, Anna gave Emily strange, lingering looks. As they were leaving, the elderly woman asked, "Have you ever thought about achieving something more than being a simple orderly?" "Honestly, I did. I wanted to become a doctor, but it didn't work out," Emily replied. "I've always loved my job and the ability to help people. But now I'm temporarily free, so maybe it's time to think about a career change." She was joking, of course, as she had never considered anything other than working within a medical institution. Yet her joke led to the most unexpected proposal. "Emily, think carefully about what I'm going to say. How about I hand over my restaurant to you? Yes, the place has been closed for a while and needs some work and a couple of weeks of paperwork. But believe me, if it takes off, you'll end up with a wonderful cafe. Plus, I still have some connections with suppliers." "That's impossible!" Emily shook her head in disbelief. "Emily, impossible was when I lost my job and all means of livelihood. The location is quite attractive. I'm not saying we'll open a French cuisine restaurant, but we can provide affordable set meals and simple lunches. And what do you want in return?" Nothing. Anna shook her head. I can feel my last day approaching, but I want to do a good deed for a good person. I hope you'll also help Noah so he doesn't end up completely alone. Besides, if your business succeeds, you can contribute much more to society. I see in you an unquenchable desire to help people. How so? Well, for instance, the elderly woman gestured towards the orphanage. You could start a fund to collect money and help orphans. Institutions like this count every penny, and every benefactor is invaluable. I'll think about it. Come on, make up your mind. All right, let's do it. Emily suddenly decided to take the leap. When do we start? Right now. For the time being, Emily, you'll be my hands and eyes, and I'll be your experience. But this is temporary. I'm confident that soon you'll master the turbulent flow of entrepreneurship, and everything will go smoothly. From this conversation, events began to unfold rapidly, merging into a series of personal achievements and accomplishments. Emily had to move into Anna's apartment, located right above the restaurant. She also had to invest a lot of her own money and effort to lift the restrictions from the premises, which had been locked for a long time. Then she had to hire the first student employees while juggling multiple roles herself, cooking, cleaning, and learning to handle the cash register. But all the effort was worth it, as 6 months later, word of mouth finally spread the news about an affordable establishment practically in the city centre where one could grab a quick bite. A year and a half of relentless struggle, paperwork, and nerves later, the restaurant finally began to break even and generate a noticeable income. During this time, whenever they could spare an hour, Grandma Anna, who had become practically family, and Emily would visit the orphanage to see Noah. Over this period, all the nannies and caregivers got to know the women. Thus, if Emily visited alone, she was let in without any issues and allowed to see the boy. The topic of adoption inevitably arose. However, the orphanage director was opposed, finding numerous reasons to refuse, including Emily's single status and her then unstable income. There was also a clear mercenary interest in prolonging the process. Emily was investing significant funds into the orphanage, and the director did not want to lose such a beneficial patron. Despite her resemblance to the head nurse, the director primarily cared about the well-being of her wards. Meanwhile, Emily's social ties within the orphanage grew. This was aided by Noah, who one day brought his friend Sasha to Emily and, with childlike sincerity, explained that no one else wanted to be friends with the newly arrived girl except one of the caregivers who trusted Emily, revealed the reason the children rejected little Alexandra. There were strong suspicions of developmental delays because the girl refused to speak to anyone except Noah. Moreover, the orphanage worker confessed that there were plans to transfer Sasha to another institution in a different city that catered specifically to children with developmental delays. It was only thanks to Emily's intervention she recorded the two children talking to each other on her phone that the suspicions about Sasha's condition were dismissed. Naturally, after these ordeals, Emily found herself with 2 words. She had to visit the orphanage regularly for several weeks. During these visits, she had several unpleasant conversations with the director. However, she managed to achieve her goal, and Sasha stayed in the regular institution. On one of these visits, right in the director's office, Emily encountered Nikolai, a well-known businessman and philanthropist who had decided to extend his influence to another social institution. Introducing themselves to each other, the business people realized they were effectively competitors. However, they turned the matter into a joke, as Nikolai owned a chain of upscale restaurants and aspired to enter politics, while Emily only ran a modest cafe for middle-class customers. The director, noticing the interaction between the prominent benefactor and the persistent yet equally generous visitor, quickly realized that the two were at least interested in each other. This became particularly evident when Emily shared her plans to organize a fund to raise money for orphans. Excellent plan. Nikolai praised his new acquaintance with a pleasant baritone. I will definitely support you financially if you take on the task of handling the paperwork and organization. I am too, administratively, added the director, inserting her 2 cents. And I've been testing the waters of your restaurant a few times, the man continued, ignoring the director's input. I thought a serious competitor had emerged. You flatter me, Emily waved off. My cafe is not of the scale to be a competitor to yours. No, you underestimate yourself. I've been to your place several times incognito. Despite the affordability of the dishes, everything is more than worthy. And if you can juggle multiple jobs, I suggest you apply your talents to my restaurant business. It will be beneficial for both of us. You'll gain the necessary experience, and I'll see your approaches to running the business. I don't even have the appropriate education for that. The woman was taken aback by such an offer. Neither do I. The owner of the restaurant chain smiled slowly. This unexpected encounter marked the beginning of romantic relations. Later on, Emily realized that Nikolai's offer for her to work for him was more of a decorative nature. The man didn't burden his new subordinate with any responsibilities, allowing her to combine her own business with hired labor. The increased income, in turn, allowed her to expand her cafe staff. And fortunately, the experienced woman didn't rush to leave the honeymoon period, as Nikolai Ivanovich concealed the fact that he was married. This fact became apparent after some very confidential conversations, during which Emily admitted that she would like to formalize her relationship with the businessman in order to take the children out of the orphanage. With each of these awkward conversations, she increasingly realized that Nikolai Ivanovich wasn't particularly keen on the idea of entering into an official marriage or formalizing guardianship over Noah and Sasha. But he was willing to compromise on some minor issues for the sake of his beloved. That's why, when a beautiful girl of roughly the same age as Emily approached the cafe's bar counter and introduced herself as Nikolai Ivanovich's wife, the cafe owner perceived it as a sign from above. Anastasia Golisheva turned out to be quite a sensible person. Therefore, the women were able to calmly negotiate in a small office about all the existing problems, after which Emily found out that Nikolai had fallen for another woman not for the first time, but invariably returned to his own wife. Emily was even grateful for the honesty. The only unpleasant residue left after the conversation was that hopes for successful adoption of Ivan and adoption of Alexandra were once again shattered, considering that Noah's grandmother was getting sicker and holding on to life by her last strength before Anna's departure, as the highest gratitude for her labours and merits. It would be nice to give the former restaurant owner a happy ending to this. After parting with her beloved, Emily found herself in a very depressed state, which could not escape the notice of her subordinate, the new chef of the establishment, William. She knew very well that the new employee, who was several years younger than his boss, started to breathe unevenly when she appeared in his field of vision. But she carefully ignored the naive signs of attention, because the man was not to her taste, suffering from excess weight. This didn't exclude the possibility that William was a very kind and sensitive nature, so he easily connected all the events and understood the hidden reasons behind his boss's depressed state. In the standard setting, everyone who worked at the cafe addressed each other by their first names. Moreover, gradually, they began to become more or less friends and share confidences with each other. Therefore, William sincerely suggested entering into a fake marriage to sort out the guardianship issues. At first, Emily laughed, taking the chef's proposal as a joke. But in the evening, noticing the deterioration of Anna's condition, she unexpectedly realized that a fake marriage was a real way out of the situation. The next morning, she set several conditions for William. No physical contact, no real feelings, but the relationship should only be for business purposes. The man, who had hoped for a few different scenarios, reluctantly agreed, and miracle of miracles. The bureaucratic machine creaked with its mechanisms, groaned with its joints, but still worked, and a couple of months later, in the apartment nearby, little Noah was already running around, getting used to having his own plates and toys again. And a month later, in the same apartment, a smiling and very gentle girl named Sasha moved in, who missed her little brother terribly when Noah left the orphanage. The grandmother lived to see this happy moment. She quietly went to heaven, happy that her beloved grandson wasn't left alone. He found a family. All this time, William strictly adhered to the conditions of the marriage contract, but trying not to lose face in front of his fake wife. He started regularly going for runs and quickly changed his physical appearance. Emily was surprised to learn that he used to be a renowned boxer, but due to severe life problems, he had to quit sports and enroll in a culinary school. After graduation, he worked on rotations and in fancy restaurants until he saw the owner of the establishment at the next job interview and fell in love at first sight. Now, Emily looked at William differently when he, cheerfully laughing, enthusiastically engaged in a mock shootout with the children for the third time that evening, using foam bullets. "Do you like children?" Emily asked the breathless man. "Well, I'm the older brother of 2 sisters and 2 brothers. He smiled widely, so I didn't have much choice. Interesting one. Well, that same night, the contract between the 2 young people was torn to shreds and burned in a not very bright, but quite steady flame of budding love. And several years later, the spouses happily brought 2 more children into this world and finally organized their own foundation, whose mission was to help orphanages.